What's up everyone, Vu of Vu Films, and I am back with another idiotic video for you to watch. And today, I'm going to discuss why the Tamron 70-180 f2.8 zoom lens for the Sony E-mount is the best telephoto zoom you can get for the Sony a7S III. The reality is, it is probably the best zoom lens you can get for any Sony E-mount camera. I'm just saying Sony a7S III because it's a new hotness and I'm just trying to take advantage of the YouTube algorithm. But anyway, why do I think this is the best lens for the Sony a7S III for video? And that is because it is cheap. And that's only one reason. It is cheap as in it is $1,200. Now, I guess $1,200 isn't really that cheap, but if you're comparing it to a 70-200 f2.8 G Master lens from Sony, you could buy two of these lenses for the price of one GM and still have some cash left over to go to your local Chinese food restaurant and get a few lunch specials. That is one reason. The other reason is that it is just an amazing lens in terms of just the footage, the quality you get, and the autofocus, and pretty much everything you need out of a zoom lens, or any lens for that matter. Footage wise, this thing will perform just as you'd like. It has great bokeh from what I'm seeing. It is sharp, the autofocus is accurate, it tracks very well, it is fantastic. And yes, I am definitely late to the party in terms of reviews for this camera, but you go watch countless of other reviews on this Tamron 70-180 and you see that it is very comparable to the Sony 70-200 G Master lens in terms of image quality, picture quality, and all that stuff. Or in some cases, it even exceeds that. So in my test, I found it to be those exact results. Now, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a cheap Vietnamese bastard who just likes to buy cheap stuff. I actually sold my 70-200 G Masters that I bought at full price and I've used for over 80 weddings. I filmed over 80 weddings with to get this lens because, one, like I said, it is cheaper, but it's also lighter, and it is something that I'm probably more likely willing to pick up and just use casually instead of the GM, which is always just sitting on my shelf until I have a wedding to shoot, where I use it primarily on a tripod for the long telephoto shot. That is all I use the GM lens for. And of course, it just looks cool as crap to have that white and black 70-200 that makes you look automatically professional. But I could find myself picking up the 70-180 as obviously the telephoto lens during wedding ceremonies and receptions, but I can also pick it up just to bring with me to do, my casual documentary work, just traveling, what have you, taking pictures of my family and video of my family and stuff like that. I could definitely see myself carrying this around versus the GM, which just sat there. So let's get into the specifics of why this lens is cheaper than a GM, even though optically it seems like it performs just as well or better. Especially autofocus is definitely better with this lens, as I know the GM has some issues with back focusing, I believe. I never had it with, doing video, but I've seen like a lot of photographers have that issue with the GM. Video, it seems to work fine. Clearly, there's only one button or one little switch, which is a lock switch to lock the zoom in place. So when it's in your bag, it doesn't move around. That is all it has. The GM has professional weather sealing. That is one advantage. It has optical steady shot, which is lens stabilization, which is quite useful for, especially when you're shooting 200 millimeters and you're trying to go handheld or something like that for photo and video. But I found that, hey, as long as I could hold steady, even, with just IBIS from, with just Sony's in-body image stabilization, with just Sony's in-body image stabilization, as average as it may be, I was able to get pretty steady shots. And, Also, you have to consider that I am Vietnamese and we are born with naturally steady hands to become good manicurists because, you know, that is what 80% of Vietnamese people do is nails. So maybe that could, you know, help me with my steady shot ability. But, you know, just something to keep in mind. But to move along, it also doesn't have like a button here or anything like that, which GM has for like, you know, you could customize it for anything. But I believe it is for like autofocus hold or something, and there's no switch for autofocus and manual focus. And what I used to do a lot with the G Master lens is if I wanted to focus on somebody on a tripod, I would just use autofocus, and as soon as it locks on that person on that tripod, especially if it's just like a still shot of them standing there, I would switch it to manual focus on the lens, switch it to MF, and then it will just stay locked in. Versus this doesn't have that. I'm gonna just have to go in, you know, press extra button on the camera itself to set it to manual focus, which is fine. It's not a big deal, but the switch was a convenience. Now, is it worth the additional $1,500, $1,600? No. I mean, I think if you are looking for a zoom telephoto lens for the Sony a7S III for video, or for any other Sony for that matter, the Tamron 70-180 is probably the best choice in terms of just for the money, because then you could get this and like a bunch of other lenses too. And this is very important for you guys who are like switching over to Sony a7S III because you don't want to get your hands burned by the Canon ESR5, or you actually want the camera to autofocus, unlike the Panasonic S1H and stuff like that. You're switching over to Sony and you don't want to spend a bunch of money on lenses. The advantage of E-mount, Sony E-mount, is the fact that it does have like a crap ton of fantastic glass that performs just as good as Sony glass that are a lot cheaper, which is the Tamron lineup. Here I actually have this is not mine, it's actually my works, but this is 28-75 Tamron f2.8, and this is the 72.8 that I just purchased. So look at that size comparison there. And I also own the 17-28, which I mentioned in my previous video. So one thing, you know, quickly to mention is obviously the missing 20 millimeters on this telephoto end. And, you know, from my use, I feel like I will not miss that extra 20 millimeters that much. You know, you could always get a little bit closer. You can't always go a little bit further back. So if I need to get into closer, I can. If I'm shooting 4K, or if I'm doing photography, if I want to like crop in a little bit to get a little more reach with the lens, and especially with the just optical quality and the sharpness of this lens, when you do a little bit of crop in, it looks fine. It looks pretty decent. So I'm not too worried about missing that extra 20 millimeters at this point. Now, some things to consider if you want to wait is probably Sony might come up with the, you know, GM Mark II, you know, 70-200 f2.8, but that's probably going to be a $2,600 to $3,000 lens. Who knows how much that's going to cost? You know, looking at Sony's track record in terms of pricing their G Master lenses. Sigma, I've heard there's a rumor Sigma will come out with a 70-200 equivalent f2.8 DG DN. DN stands for D's nuts lens. So that's something to look out for. It's probably going to be cheaper than the Sony G Master lens, but it will probably be more expensive than the Tamron 70-180. But most likely you will get the full 70-200 range, as well as weather sealing, as well as other like professional features that Sigma is known for, including switches, buttons, and all that stuff, just as a Sony G Master lens would be, but for almost half the cost. So that is something to consider. But as of right now, if you had just pre-ordered a7S III, or you are a Sony shooter and you're just looking for a solid telephoto zoom lens for your camera, I highly recommend the 70-180 Tamron, unless you are shooting in a volcano in Antarctica, or you are shooting next to someone using an ESR5. It might explode and it might ruin your lens because there's no weather sealing and all that stuff. But then again, that is what insurance is for. So for $1,200, you get this lens plus insurance, and if something happens to it, you just get your lens fixed or replaced for still cheaper than the 70-200 G Master lens. And I'm gonna be honest with you, even if I had a super weather sealed lens like the GM 7200, I still don't want to be shooting in rain, snow, or anything like that. So that is that, guys. Till next time, please like and subscribe and lighten up.